Hello world of YouTube and welcome to the listening log update for May of 2024. I've got 14 new albums that I'll be talking about in this video with time codes listed in the description for each individual album review if you want to skip around in the video to get a slice of my opinion on something. There was some surprise releases, as have been the trend throughout the last couple of years this month. Some stuff I was anticipating also finally coming out, and a couple of catch-ups from stuff that I've talked about, I'll be talking about on these updates, and I just haven't to yet, along with some just already stuff that's flown past me that I meant to catch when it initially dropped. But either way, a lot of stuff to talk about. Let's go ahead, dive on in, starting with... You guys know at the end of last month, I was at sort of a crossroads with what I wanted to listen to, given two very heavily anticipated for me personally follow-ups were dropping. And while I chose All Born Screaming to close out last month, I told myself I would open this month with Justice's Hyperdrama. A follow-up to, I would argue, is one of the most underrated records of its year, was released at the wrong time. I did a whole video about that. But I was excited, if not, like, kind of hesitant with this new Justice release, because I love these two. I think that they've got a really interesting discography, along with a lot of really solid records, and some classics and personal favorites of mine within the genre as well. But they were teasing this record with something that a lot of the electronic scene has done. Not to say that I think it's a problem. Some Kevin Parker collaborations. I don't hate Tim Impala. I think I've made that pretty clear. I think he's pretty alright as a musical producer, and he's done a great job at making a sound. I just didn't know how Justice doing his style would sort of jive. And this whole record has moments where they're trying to, like, dip into stuff that, like, the genre's got going on. And I actually like both singles for the record. I think they work well together as, like, an extended single and within the context of the discography, which I think is, again, a further showcasing of these two's masterful construction of integrating songs into sequencing. It's one of the things I love about their debut. It's something that I do love about this. I think the sequencing on this is absolutely choice. I think the stretch from Neverender through Dear Allen is some classic vintage Justice excellence. I think that One Night All Night out of the two collaborations is my favorite, and I think that pocket of After Image into Dear Allen, where the group is sort of doing a different current interpolation with the Riemann collaboration that leads well into that, but then it leads into Dear Allen, this tribute to two French electronic DJs, pretty fantastically. And I think that Dear Allen is a cool-ass tribute. I think that it, as this sort of bookend for this sonic through line, is C'est Magnifique. I just think that's a great point that pivots into Incognito with this sort of little sidestep, but I love how Incognito just goes right back into being a just classic sounding Justice song. It's got this propulsion to it that is igniting and electrifying, and again sort of signifies another really good stretch of songs. I think that, like, the fact that it gets a little low-key from Moonlight through Muscle Memory to a degree, even though Muscle Memory kind of picks up the kineticism a bit, I think it's pretty cool. I love the synth texturing throughout that as well. It's Justice putting their stuff into ideas that the electronic and funk scene are sort of dipping into. You know, they've got a very synth-funk-ass collaboration with Miguel and Saturnine that I think is solid as fuck. I also love the collaboration with Thundercat that ends this. You know, by the by, I think the collaborations, while stacked, all come together really strongly. I think that this is a good sort of flashy, variety-style record a la Woman, but in a different lane, and I think that it also executes its mission statement pretty fucking strongly. As a fan of these two, I think this is another successful notch in their belt. I think that the production on this balances homage and collaboration with their own ubiquitous sound pretty swell. And I like this. It's probably not going to be amongst my favorites of the year, but I could see it somewhere on my top 50. It's going to be getting an 8 out of 10 at the very least. I think that it's a strong album that has some good grooves. Again, I love the layering of synths, the hook-driven stuff when it's here, you know, and how the group balances collaboration on this. By the by. Really strong release from these two.
Everybody knows. Catch me or I go Houdini.
The road to radical optimism has been one of growing disinterest the longer that Dua Lipa went without releasing a follow-up to Future Nostalgia. I love that record. I still think it's probably one of the strongest pop albums of the decade thus far. And that level of disinterest only got more and more intense with singles like Houdini dropping that, again, were fine, but like if only relatively pretty idiosyncratic in a way that felt like it was the lazy kind of recycling that happens when an artist wants to work on and build upon a foundation. It doesn't have the sort of nourishing that can happen in a transition and feels more just kind of like a carbon copy version of something that isn't quite as fruitful the second time around. It's got a decent bass line, it's got a solid synth behind it all, and the production is clean enough that everything stands out in a really fun way. In the same ways that they did on the contribution that she did to the Barbie soundtrack that I thought, again, was fine, if not, like, as good as what she had done her last record. It wasn't showing any growth. Yeah, while, again, there's some elements that dance in the background that feel different, a la what parts of Houdini did, that I think are neat, like those kind of Italo-disco chords that coat the opener, End of an Era. Or like the way the flourishing dancing synths sort of build behind the funky bass on What You Doing, create a fun fusion of styles. Those elements don't leave a lasting impression or bridge the ideas in a way that I think is as interesting as some of the stuff that was present on Future Nostalgia that did the same thing. Hell, even the, you know, dance style of Illusion feels like it's trying to build upon the sort of funk inspiration in a way that lies into the 90s nostalgia in the way that some of Future Nostalgia did. I think something that enhances that carbon copy feeling tenfold and why these expansions don't feel all that more fruitful is the songwriting doesn't have the same punch that it did on the last record. In fact, a lot of the hooks feel more predictable than anything else. You know, while Houdini kind of awkwardly uses its title into its hook, songs like These Walls and Illusion and Falling Forever absolutely have hooks that, like, once they start feel like the most unsurprising use of said phrase in a pop song. It makes this album feel like a disappointment by the by, which is a shame to say because, again, I love Future Nostalgia. I think it's a strong-ass pop album, and this one just isn't as good to me. I'm giving it a 5 out of 10 because the production is competent. A lot of the elements that are new are at least fun. Just the album doesn't do anything to enhance those new elements and more waters it all down. In just the saddest of ways.
The killer bee swarming. The way I play the corner similar to Josh Norman. I convert.
Ghostface Killah is back with another gangster rap collaborative odyssey and Set the Tone, Guns N' Roses, an album that sees him working with a lot of familiar faces, but also some recurring names on the project to sort of reinforce this sonic direction, to carry these various portraits of this gangster lifestyle, to set the tone, as it were. I'd kind of see it in the framework of like a Pretty Tony or like a Fish Scale sort of combo deal. And I think by the by, a lot of the tracks come together in a pretty good consistency. You know, again, a lot of these names are ones he's worked with a smattering at times. I mean, he's got a Method Man, Raekwon collab two-peat out the gate with Pair of Hammers, with Method Man being this gritty gangster rap track that I think slides into Skate Odyssey pretty smoothly with its sleek instrumental that, again, Ghostface and Ray seemingly have some pretty fun over. One of my breaks from the Kendrick and Drake beef was Scar Tissue, the track with Nas that had dropped, and I thought that it was a fine enough song, and I think that that is ultimately the best walkaway I can say about this, and that is that this album, by the by, is pretty fine. I think that it's got a pretty strong start because I think 6 minutes is a decent, stage setter that has this fun flip of the phrase 6 minutes in relation to various illegal activities that I think is done pretty strongly, and again leads into the sort of 3-hit legacy combos of the Wu-Tang and the Nas ones just very well. And I also think that the initial stretch from Pair of Hammers through Killah in the Safe has this sort of variety style that I think invites the listener into the sort of kaleidoscope vision that Ghostface paints throughout this. But I just think that at the other end of the project's sort of conclusion, there's just a handful of songs that end up fine enough. There's a variety in the collaborations as a whole that I think kind of add to that inconsistency. There's a love shown to a lot of eras in New York hip-hop, for better and worse. You've got Remy Ma coming in on Yep, the Closer, which was kind of a surprising shocker. And I honestly love the homages on Champion Sound a decent amount. While I went into the idea of a Fat Joe feature in 2024 with lower expectations, again, I've heard worse from him. I mean, yeah, I wasn't stoked to spin this because Kanye was on it, and obviously I just haven't been trying to talk about Kanye too much on this channel. But it's sad when his feature is better than Busta Rhymes' feature, because Busta's feature is slapped on the reggaeton track, which is also just an oddity in the track listing. Just the idea of bringing these minds together on this project feels like Ghostface getting nostalgic, and that's part of what feels like a lot of the lyrics are jumping into. It does the gangster, image painting and all that sort of stuff and reflections, but it's with a creative team that all feels like they're trying to recapture some sort of nostalgia, for better or worse, while having some moments that get contemporary in ways that I don't think are always choice. I'm giving this album a 6. It is a solid, if not relatively skit-heavy project that goes a little too far with how scattershot it goes, but when it shines, it's got some decent ideas.
You think I'm crazy, but I'm high all the time.
I'm of two minds with Atavista, this new Childish Gambino release. On one hand, I respect the ambition of an artist to redact his work in a sort of way, as somebody who does that once a month on his channel. I think it's cool to see an artist rework a project like he did with this, and I am of two minds of some of the mixes. I like some more than others, but I'll talk about that in the other part of this portion of the review. But I also don't like that with the release of Atavista, he has stripped the original version from most streaming platforms. It's obviously not off the internet because it's really hard to do, especially with a platform like YouTube that exists. But when sitting with Atavista as a record, it has this, strange incidence of, altered familiarity. Both good and bad, because, I enjoyed 3:15:20 a decent amount. I thought it was a solid album. I don't think I liked it as much as other parts of his discography, but it had some interesting highlights that I think a polishing up, even at the time, could have helped enrich, especially given some of the hook-driven natures of some of this. In the same breath, I've also walked away from that record with some tracks of his that have grown to be some of my personal favorites in his discography, like Algorithm, along with To Be Hunted, which I think is an absolute smash. I like both mixes relatively fine enough, but I think that the vocals on the original and how punchy they were helped. I kind of wish I could Franken mix the two together. Algorithm I like more out of the two versions of songs that I really love from this record. And when it comes to psilocybin, both versions sound fine enough. I'm indifferent to both mixes of the song personally. I'm just glad I don't hate the new algorithm as much as I was afraid I might, given how much I love that song intensely. And as far as new additions go, I actually like Atavista, the track, as the opener. I think it helps welcome the especially hook-driven stuff pretty strongly, as well as this interesting sort of turn-of-phrase concept. It's a good stage setter, in my opinion, even if I think it should still have the intro from the original, because I think it's a good ambient intro for algorithm, but I digress. I still think Atavista is a really good inclusion. As far as, like, going to bridge my positives and negatives, I think the remix, as far as the quality of the mix on Littlefoot Bigfoot, is good. It's what the song needs to kind of put it over the edge. Same with Time. I actually really like the new version of Time that's on here. I think that the original is still good, but I think that this new version helps send the pop edge of that song over the edge, or over the crest, in the best way. I will say, I think the beat switch on Littlefoot Bigfoot isn't needed, but outside of that, a lot of that is good. To shorten 3928 into, like, a little interlude-ass jam, absolute crime. To completely remove 4226, absolutely unnecessary. Sweet Thing is also another moment where I like Summer Walker, and I think that she actually does help and sort of enrich that song and helps, again, sort of bring out the mix and make it feel more full and hook-driven in a song that's got, like, a nice groove. I think the fuller production helps sell the groove a little bit better. Again, there's a lot of moments like that that help elevate it. I'm just kind of torn, because for every improvement like that I enjoy, there are some choice decisions made that I think strip back the project. I do think some of the choices in the back end make the album's back end on this version not as good as in the original, in my opinion. Even if it does still have some sort of genre pivots and fun sort of excursions throughout it to help make the album feel more full. I just kind of wish it still had some of the moments that it was missing from the original version. I still think it's got enough quality jams to end it positive. I still think that it's an interesting excursion. I just wish it didn't come at the cost of the original across most streaming. Again, it's still available on YouTube at the very least, and I don't think it's ever really going to leave the internet. People are going to have it saved somewhere just for preservation's sake. But, like, it's fine. It's getting a 6. I think I gave the original a 6 because it's got a lot of solid ideas. And again, it improves on some of the ideas I had from the original, but I think it wasn't the cost for it wasn't enough, or wasn't worth it in my opinion, or net it any more positive than it would have just to do that. Fan and commenter, my name is Blue Sky, had been recommending this new Joy Guidry record, Amen. And I had been already kind of amped to be spinning some jazz and some ambient stuff this month, so I was like, this will fit kind of nicely in my rotation. And I gotta say, this is a pretty choice recommendation. Not only do I feel like Joy, who's a bassoonist, integrates these inspirations in, like, jazz and gospel into this through line of getting through one's own inner conflict when coming out as a trans person, especially in, like, the eyes of faith. And I think that, like, the pain felt, even just in instances like the interlude Pick and Choose, where this sample that talks about how people will choose, you know, they'll weaponize words to fit their own agenda within the eyes of faith, and how they can feel. And it goes really well into Members Don't Get Weary, which I think kind of heightens the tension from that song and channels it masterfully. You know, the march of the track Angels, where you kind of feel the almost the burden of faith, or what feels like the weight of faith on you as you're going along in life. You know, on top of that, the ambient stuff, like tracks like Day by Day, I Will Always Miss You, and the closer Revelations, put this record's sort of uses spirituality in the construction of it all and helps sort of send that positivity outward amidst the serious or almost gloomier subject matter. It creates a good sort of contrast to some of the jazz in a really poignant way. And I enjoy this thing a lot. It's it's a concise record. It's tight. I kind of wish some of the ideas went a little further, especially some of the ambient stuff, because I like when it's here. But I do enjoy the use of, you know, pads, all the other players at hand that help bring this together, brought life to a lot of these sort of expressions just fantastically across the board. You know, I think that especially throughout the closer, as these layered vocals kind of stack on top of each other amidst these just very cold pads, creates a really cool effect that I like that the song builds to, and it's again a moment that I kind of wish went on for even just longer. Either way, I still think that this is a pretty fantastic release by the by. I think that if you enjoy ambient music or you enjoy jazz, you know, to any capacity, you know, the stuff that's here is pretty damn good. I think it's got great production. I think that a lot of the synths gel well with the ambience, you know, and the other instruments kind of help meld it all together in this mood that I think is resonated really strongly. I don't know. I'm giving this an 8. I think it's a strong-ass album. I feel like if you enjoy the stuff that this is playing with, you'll get a lot out of it, personally. And I think it's got some strong emotional stuff musically as well, just permeating throughout it.
Niggas wasting a sentence. Tennis shoes cheaper than interviews when you half fast, remember?
Now, while I do take some time to pull these listening log updates together and I don't film everything in a single sitting anymore, I used to do that, I've also done laundry between starting this and finishing it, so you're going to see this yellow shirt vibe crop up a couple of times, starting with Mach-Hommy's end to a saga that I have very little knowledge about, but am tackling as a newer fan of his material, RICHAXXHAITIAN, or hashtag RICHAXXHAITIAN, a project that was the subject of intrigue and discourse throughout the month because it was like it was on Spotify and then it wasn't, and I was back. It's not like his lyrics aren't on Genius by request. Like, it's a record that feels very dense with subject matter too, which I think is very interesting, and it feels like a record with purpose. You know, there's a lot of this record that feels very indicative of Mach-Hommy's artistry in the most honest way, like I feel like it could be portrayed. You know, he's got shit where he's got hooks in French, like on Sur les Ponts d'Avignon. You know, there's a handful of tracks like Gorgonzola Land that end with these extended phone conversations, and it just feels like this, again, album-ass experience that has a lot that it has to say. The production stacking in this as a whole is incredible. You know, the Quell Crisp beat on Copy Cold going into the title track, which has an incredible K-Tronada beat, and a really good feature from O3 Greedo, which also, the Black Thought feature on Copy Cold, choice as hell. I love him and the God Fahim on Pardon. I think that the two of them in general just have really good chemistry, and I like seeing them channel it really strongly on there. I like your old Droog a lot. I'm excited for his record. His verse had some weird-ass bars. I also think Rock Marciano helps kick this thing off fantastically on Anatomasia. I just think it's interesting that for a dude that spins a lot of creative ideas like hooks in front, I just think it's interesting that a guy with this sort of purposefulness with his lyrical content, especially given that this is this saga, which seemingly has been like a sort of praise for Haiti and some assistance for Haiti, because I did spin Pray for Haiti when it came out, but I'm still not that deep on Mach-Hommy, the artist, you know, and I just think that it's, given how much I like this, given how much I love his flow construction, like the way that he chops it up over the absolutely serene Same 24. Again, he goes bar for bar with a lot of the features on here. I think he flows over that really cool, spacey, loose beat on Political, just incredibly so. He's a great rapper. Just happens to also be a really dope creative circle, something that I think has been an interesting sort of resurgence, at least a couple times this year in hip-hop. But I love what Mach-Hommy has going on here. I think that he's an interesting artist. I think that he is a talented artist. And I think that this is a well-constructed record that I'm giving an 8 out of 10.
When I'm in my car, vibing in the streets, I need space like stars, I need time to think.
I have been so excited for Rapsody to follow up Eve, because that was my real starting point into Rapsody's albums. You know, she is a name that in hindsight I had heard in pockets here and there, because she is just that kind of talented artist that crops up from time to time. But I think that, like, her album constructing style is pretty fucking awesome. And I think that on Please Don't Cry, she has this interesting through line and these well-cemented themes that she just owns and creates some really captivating and engaging songs out of them, along with some bangers on top of that. You know, for as much as I think that, like, while I criticize some of the skit stuff on an album like RICHAXXHAITIAN, the skit stuff on here, I think, adds to the experience in a way that helps enrich a lot of it. It's a lot more focused. You know, RICHAXXHAITIAN has a lot going on. It is a dense project. I don't mean to compare them so closely to each other, but I did just talk about that album. But I think that, like, her ability to also have this really good kaleidoscope of collaborations. You know, Hit Boy did the beat on Asteroids. I fucking love that song. I think that it is a choice-ass jam that puts the mission statement of the record of owning yourself and, you know, empowering yourself, and especially being a woman with a voice. I think it enriches those themes strongly. You know, they come back on Black Pop Star. They also come back on the banger Back in My Bag, while also painting some fantastic stories on the likes of DND, It's Not Personal, and on 3 AM, another really strong, emotional-driven track with Erykah Badu that I think is just chef's kiss. I think she chops it up with Lil Wayne on Raw so fucking well. The real personal confessional style on Loose Rocks, where she's just chopping it up over this ambient beat, I think is fantastically done. As a whole, I think it does a good job at melding these personal reflections with her reflections on the world as a whole, and speaking on her perspective in the industry as she's seen it. Very well unified. I think this is a project that blends a lot of fun twists, you know, with some G-Funk inspired production, some sensuality explored, like on Lonely Woman. Like, there's a full portrait here that I think is painted beautifully. I love her bar spinning. I love, as a whole, a lot of what this has going on. I feel like if you like hip-hop that not only is pulled together with a really sharp pen, but also blends good hooks, great production, again, creates a good collaborative circle, but around this creative through line, with skits that are also well placed to sort of carry those narratives throughout. I think this is a strong version of that. I'm giving this an 8 out of 10 because I love the artistry here. Friend of the channel and Chicago synth dude Brady Matteson also dropped a new album recently, Paper Hearts. It's a project that feels like Brady sort of purging some deep emotions. There's some sadness lingering amidst the drones and, you know, waves of sounds that sort of coat a lot of the atmosphere on here that I think come across full stop. I really enjoy the sort of immediate variety and texturing that he sort of explores throughout here. You know, I love how the title opening track fades with the birds coming in and it welcomes in Years Your Future where they kind of sit in the backdrop for a while he creates this noisier soundscape. I love how a song like Connective Tissues sort of sonics feel very thin and sort of frail. You know, a lot of the synth texturing and the pads used are soft, and I think they sort of evoke that thin, frail tissue while the sort of low end shakes around you as if it's the sort of the actual POV of the pieces within a heart. I think it's a really cool sort of sonic soundscape that he pulls together on there as well. You know, a lot of the buzzing synths that creep up on there also kind of evoke that sort of frailness. I don't know. There's a cool harnessing of sort of room that Brady does on this project that I think sort of elevates it in a way to a handful of the stuff that is certainly from that I had started to listening, certainly from where he began and where I had sort of gotten into some of his earlier stuff through where he's at now. I think there's an even more broadening of artistry that happens on here that I think is pretty fucking sick. You know, I like the sort of reprise of Broken Pieces, but the second part of it being more dense or like a bit more shattered across. You know, it's a cool sort of comeback that the album resolves around to that I think slides into Closing Valves, which sort of tries to evoke a similar effect of Connective Tissue. I love how full a lot of this record sounds, and I think that like if you love a good textured soundscape, there's some really cool pieces across this that I think are pulled together very well in that sort of textured but also deep sort of fashion. There are some tracks that I think overstay their welcome maybe a bit, but I think that by the pacing of a lot of this is really choice. I think that, like, again, the production ideas that I think are presented on here I think come across pretty well, and I think that there's some cool stuff sort of played around with in atmosphere on here that I think Brady does some neat stuff with. I'm giving this an 8. I think it's a new personal favorite of mine in Brady's catalog, and I think that if you're wanting some good, somewhat dense, but also spacious ambient stuff, Brady cooked up some good shit with Paper Hearts, man. You going over there, Mac? Are you going in your little hole? Because I'm recording? Hold on. There you go, buddy. He's like, the door was closed. I couldn't get in there. Mac's got this thing going on now where he'll go up in there and he'll like hide in there while I'm recording. He'll like go in that corner. He's doing it now. Look at him. He's like, yep. There's my hole. I go hide in here. Goodbye. It's so weird. I don't know why he does it. He's just started doing it. I have been stoked for this new John Carpenter album. I think that his Lost Theme saga has been equal parts intriguing and, you know, pays off pretty well in my opinion creatively. I think at least for as far as quality is considered, even if my least favorite one is 2, it at least introduces ideas that feel fruitful and sort of tangential from aspects of John Carpenter's compositional work equally as much as the horror stuff. I'm just more of a fan of the ambient stuff by the by, but I was excited that he was still including Daniel and his son into the group because I think that they create some cool stuff musically. And on Noir, while it does what the second one does as far as like embracing his love of like hard rock more, like on the second one, it blends it well under this noir mystique pretty greatly in my opinion. You know, the opener, My Name is Death, is just this pulsing thud where, you know, John and Cody and Daniel just sort of layer these mechanics with this, you know, fuzzy bass line and this guitar into this Terminator-esque scale march that I think coalesces into a pretty cool crescendo, complete with this 80s ass guitar riff after the ambient bridge comes through. You know, I like that it still doesn't lose sight of some of those horror roots in some degree, whether it be some of the synth texturing on a track like Last Rites, or the sort of lurching mechanics of Machine Fear. You know, while Noir feels like the overarching mood, I like that doesn't necessarily mean what I thought it was going to mean up front, and that it was going to be like John Carpenter goes acoustic. I actually really am glad that it's not that, because stuff like He Walks by Night is that gothic-inspired fucking Carpenter ampedness that I just crave from these releases. I love the synth play on that song so fucking much. It's Castlevania core as fuck, and it's going in my Halloween rotation ASAP. That's the kind of gothic inspiration I really loved in the Halloween Kills soundtrack that I was glad to see come to light in this. You know, Beyond the Gallows after that sort of blends that idea in with the sort of same kinetic synth vibes that are seen on like the Escape from LA soundtrack, and I also love that about the touches of this. There's a lot to this that I think is pretty fucking cool, and again, the mood is felt throughout in a lot of surprising but also just dope-ass moments that as a fan of John Carpenter, I think, are done so fantastically. You know, is every song on here a banger, or do I see myself maybe scooping this in the same way that I did the third one and the first one? I'm not sure, because while I do have a lot of praise for a lot of this, there's a couple of tracks that I kind of wish came together a little better, or at least one glaring one in particular that I think kind of cuts through the back end like a sore thumb. Guillotine. You know, I'm also not big on the guitar stuff of Kiss the Blood Off of My Fingers, but it at least fits in some components like it does on tracks like The Demon Shadow, which again, similarly to He Walks by the Night and Beyond the Gallows, kind of melds that gothic inspiration in a way that I think is just say magnifique. By the by, I still have a lot of heaps of praise to throw out this thing. I think that it's really choice. As a huge fan of this guy, they're just knocking it out of the park. This is getting an 8 out of 10. I think this thing is just fantastic. If you like this shit, there's another one for you, man. Again, I still may copy it even if I don't like, even if I think Guillotine especially kind of ruins the back end with how the guitar stands out on it, in my opinion.
Life hard, but I go harder. Life hard, but I go.
Vince Staples decided to drop a surprise record in May with Dark Times, a record that is also his last on his label. It sees him bidding a farewell, while also being what I would argue is the sort of follow-through to the sort of emotional weight he's been sort of rapping about over the last couple of releases in particular, with this expertly crafted, still concise as hell release that goes in and out with this exploration of the hardships of life still being present, in spite of a rising trajectory, yet still trying to find a way to persevere on top of that throughout it. You know, the hook of what is immediately and easily my biggest takeaway from the record, at least right now, Little Homies with its hook of Life Hard But I Go Harder, feels like a sentiment echoed on a track like Government Cheese, while having moments of dwelling in a melancholic sense and having lyrics, you know, talking about the loss of life and reflection on it, and missing of the old times like on Black and Blue or on Radio in specifics, sprinkled with other reflections of feeling like an outcast amidst the grind on Etouffee, which is another hook-driven banger that is an incredible highlight for me as well. Just lends to this record's breezy feeling more dense with ideas, and what I feel like Vince goes for on a lot of his records, but finds a way to blend all of those elements so masterfully this time around. And what I would argue is easily one of the best records I've heard this year, but is absolutely another highlight in his stacked discography. You know, the production on this thing, by and large, is absolutely pristine. The floaty beat on Children's Song, the beat switch up on Etouffee, the way that the drums just kick throughout this and help enhance all of these environments, like the synth hook-driven Little Homies, or the chopped up soul stuff on Freeman, which helped round the album out into this almost fond farewell. I absolutely think this record is fantastic. Will end up high on my albums of the year list personally. I'm giving this a 9. I think it is a kaleidoscope of brooding reflection, just pulled together so eloquently by Vince and the sort of team at hand.
But I wish you the best for the rest of.
If I'm going to be comparing albums at the start of a review, especially since I had seen discourse around one of the artists continuing to drop new records around the time of like this album's release, I was more personally intrigued to see what Billie had to say on her record, and walking away from this, I think this is not what I was expecting. Similarly to the Torture Poets Department, but like in a completely different realm. I think that the sonics of this are just so much more full of life, it feels like, even if it is dabbling into, you know, the emotional reflection on, like, you know, the opening track Skinny, where, you know, Billie Eilish talks about her own POV of, again, continuing to see her fame evolve, you know, being now the subject of, you know, being picked apart as what happens in the fame. I mean, I'm critiquing her album right now. The way that that song evolves, and to have this second half where Phineas just pops the fuck off sound-wise. The production on this album, chef's kiss, to just pivot for a second, because I'm going to talk about, you know, because the lyrical aspect of this, I think, is absolutely an interesting sort of place for Billie to sort of talk about. But, like, the way this record sounds, the way that it balances stuff like gravitas and you know, string-filled ambience with like that same sort of moody edge that Billie was sort of penning, and you know, they were both creatively pulling together on Happily Ever After, but then also like throwing it even further into like just straight up pop funk realms, with like Lunch having this meaty little bass groove, you know, that almost sounds like an off-cut, you know, pop track from like the late 2000s. That's got a really fun lead throughout the bridge of that song that I think is fucking awesome, which I think Lunch is a really fun little pivot from the gravitas of Skinny into Lunch. You know, it's a fun little play on the sequencing and words, but also it's a much more, it's a cutesy little love song that dives more directly into Billie having this, you know, fascination with a woman. I think that it's done so with grace. I think that she gracefully tackles the subject matter. I think she penned some really good, catchy songs on that. I think that the overt groove of Chihiro, and I think that like the conversational style of that, I think fits the groove of that song fantastically. I've liked Billie penning these sort of more groove-driven songs like Therefore I Am from the last record, and I think this is another really choice one like that. You know, while the album does take a swift swerve after Birds of a Feather being like the last more kinetic groove-driven song for a handful of track, I think that it does capture this sort of emotional feeling after Chihiro a little more deeply. You know, the conversations changed and things are a little more different. The mood, there's an arc to this record that I think is well constructed. You know, and sonically, while you do get much more emotional and like acoustic on Wildflower that builds to this climax, you know, it pivots into the greatest magnificently. I think that as far as like Billie's voice also just sounding more harnessed, it does so on here. That I think Happily Ever After like definitely explored her range a little more, but like I think she dances with that range fantastically on here. I also think that after those two songs of really exploring emotion, pivoting into a song like Love of My Life is just, again, fantastic sequencing. The way that this record plays, it plays magnificently. I love this. As far as, like, great pop albums from the year, this is absolutely that. I'm giving it a 9 because it does the name of the album. It hits you hard and then soft. Yeah! Yeah! I'm actually going to close this month out with 2 records that I've put on the teaser for the listening log, but space pudding for one reason or another. And with Only God Was Above Us, the newest Vampire Weekend album, it was more that I sat with it throughout the end of last month, but admittedly, I kind of kept it in my rotation before I started spinning Hyperdrama at the beginning of the month. I just kind of wanted to sit with it, and since I do these once a month, I just didn't want to hold off on that listening log update any longer. But, like, it's not because I think that this record is a new classic in their catalog. While I enjoyed Father of the Bride's sort of through line, I thought that it was a bit too much at the seams. I was curious to see what their follow-up would sound like, considering it was them sort of branching out farther from their sort of quirky indie roots into, like, homages of other eras of music, more so than, like, their pure Graceland worship. But with this newest record, it feels like they're sort of reintroducing themselves to some capacity by taking their foundations and giving them a production pivot that I don't think necessarily hurts the band, but I don't think makes them all that more interesting. Like, I enjoy the production by and large on Classical. I think that might be the most interesting sounding jam on the record. I think it's a buoyant, fun, classic Vampire Weekend sounding song with the same kind of wordy lyrics that I would expect from them. But it just feels like it's in a different flavor that I kind of still enjoy. The same can be said of Connect, and I think Gen X Cops kind of does a fun flip on their sound and injects noise in a way that, like, they had done in the past, but is very much more a mission statement for this project, a la also, like, the opener Ice Cream piano. But as a whole, I don't think that this brand of Vampire Weekend is pulling together music that I think is all that compelling for me anymore, anyway. Like, again, it's not musically unsound, and again, I like a handful of the sort of turns of phrase, and again, some of those lyrical tricks still kind of get me in a fun sort of way. And there's some moments like the trip-hop breakdown in Mary Boone that I think are fun directional pivots for them that sort of fall in line with where I feel like maybe some of their fandom may have ended up post them sort of shifting their sound elsewhere. But even then, there's some slower moments and moments that sort of feel like experiments unto themselves, like Capricorn or Hope, which it being followed after another sort of relatively weaker cut Prada doesn't do the end of the album any favors in my opinion. But I don't think Hope is all that interesting of a sort of dynamic, interesting closer for them writing this like 8-minute jam. There's just some moments on here that I think weigh this project down more than I think their Bag of Tricks Still Working on Me helps it, if that makes any sense. I'm giving this a 7 because it's got some cool ideas, it's got some fun songs, but I just don't think that this album is all that interesting upon revisits in the way that other records of theirs have, in my opinion, have done in the past. Thanks for watching. If you like this, give it a like. If you want to see more, consider subscribing. I drop 2 to 4 vids a week, depending on what I've got going on. I have Mario dropping later tomorrow, given this dropped now. And I've got a fun next month for you with some sweet deliciousness. Some summer excursions, if you will. Take care, everybody. You guys have good days, lives, and situations, and I'll see you another day. He's coming out. He's like, oh, you're talking about Brady? I like that guy. Mac.